I'd like to talk about the materials we'll be using for the projects involving line. We'll also talk about how to set up to draw. One of the great things about drawing is that the materials are relatively inexpensive. You can set yourself up with professional quality drawing tools for a very modest sum. For many of the projects, you'll need 18 by 24-inch white drawing paper, so get a pad. A smaller sketchbook will also be useful. Something that's in the 9 by 12 or 11 by 14 range would work very well. To get started, we'll be making a test sheet using graphite, charcoal, and ink. So you need a couple sheets of 18 by 24-inch white paper and a drawing board large enough to accommodate the paper. Put 2 sheets of paper on your board. The undersheet's a buffer. It adds a little more give to the surface. It also protects your drawing in case there are any irregularities or dirt on the board itself. Except for the buffer sheet, you don't want to put any other sheets of paper underneath the sheet you're drawing on because it's easy to emboss lines on the sheets underneath. If you put value over an area with embossed lines, you'll get white lines where you've embossed, and that can ruin a drawing. You may want to attach the paper to the board with some clips or tape as you need to. Let's start with pencils. Though we commonly call these lead pencils, they're actually made of graphite mixed with clay. The root of the word graphite comes from ancient Greek. It means to write or draw, same root as graph or graffiti, which are literally little drawings. The first large deposit of graphite was found in England by the mid-16th century. Later, people figured out how to turn it into a powder, then reform it into a solid shape and encase it in wood. Graphite pencils come in varying degrees of hardness, and that's controlled by the amount of clay that gets mixed with the graphite. Less clay softer, more clay harder. The primary scale used for artist-grade pencils is known as the European letter scale. 10B is the softest and darkest, 10H is the hardest and lightest. So the numbering system's pretty straightforward. We have 22 pencils in all. And starting over here at the 10B, we go down to 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, down to a single B. Then we climb up on the other side, the hard pencils from H, 2H, all the way up to that 10H. Between the B's and the H's, we have an HB, and between the HB and the H, we have an anomaly, an F. Now, different ranges have existed at different times, and different manufacturers make different ranges. Some manufacturers only make an 8B to a 9H. And looking back at some texts from the mid-20th century, it seemed like the common range then was from 6B to 9H. One of the first things you want to do, just as I've done here on my page, is to take out all your pencils, go from the softest to the hardest, make a single line, note of course what pencil you're using, make a straight line, then make a series of small lines, a little area of value, some scribbles, whatever you want to try, just to get an idea of what each of your pencils does and how they're different. Now, the way the pencil behaves is also going to interact with the kind of paper you're using, and they're going to look different on different papers. Historically, most people just doing general drawing have used, from about 4B to 2H. The very high H pencils are used for drafting and illustration and technical drawing and for very fine detail. But because pencils are so inexpensive, it's great to have the whole range and to experiment with all of them. Now, this is that European scale going from 10B to 10H, but of course you're familiar with the famous number 2 pencil, and that's part of the American scale, and that one has 5 degrees, going from a 1, 2, 2.5, 3, and a 4, although you don't see the 3s and the 4s very much. Over here I have a 1 and a 2. Technically, the 1 is an equivalent to a B, the 2 to an HB, the 2.5 to an F, the 3 to an H, and the 4 to a 2H. But neither the European or US scale is standardized. So if you have 2 pencils of the same number, but from different manufacturers, let's say you have 2 2B pencils, one may well be softer than the other. That's pretty common. And not all brands and not all qualities are alike either. So what a good idea is to get yourself a whole set of pencils from one good manufacturer, and that way at least they'll correspond to each other across that manufacturer's scale. Now, of course, there are all kinds of pencils like this one over here, which isn't part of either scale. But All these pencils are great. They can all be used. Look around your house, see what kind of pencils you have, gather them all together, and begin to make some marks with them, including, in addition to the ones you make with your full set. And let's just make a couple marks here. Here we are with this number 1 pencil, which is supposedly equivalent to a B, and I'll put it right under my B over here. And it's just a little bit lighter, a little bit harder. And here's my number 2, which is supposedly like an HB. And it too is just a bit lighter than the HB that I'd used from this set. And we'll take this, which is just called a jet black, extra smooth, and make a line with that as well. And you can see that's a very robust, dark pencil, even more so than my 10B. Now, one thing we want to talk about is sharpening our pencils. And of course, we can use a standard pencil sharpener to sharpen a pencil, and it gives us a nice fine point, and that's very good for a lot of drawing and certainly useful for writing. But artists sharpen their pencils in a variety of ways, and the 2 tools we call upon are a utility knife and a sanding block. And what we can do is we can taper the pencil in a number of ways. And I'm going to take this number 1 pencil here, and what we're going to do is we're going to expose a lot more of the graphite than we normally would with a regular pencil sharpener. And what I'm doing is I'm holding the utility knife in my right hand, and I'm just keeping it steady in my right hand, but I'm pushing it forward with the thumb of my left hand. And I'm trying to cut not at too deep a diagonal. I want to remove the wood without gouging the graphite itself. And I can use the utility knife to begin to shape the graphite to a gradual point. And I'm rotating the pencil in my left hand as I'm scraping with the utility knife in my right. And I can combine that with using my sanding block to get a very long exposed piece of graphite. So now I can not only get a nice thin line using the point, but I can also get a much thicker line using that side plane. Now, a variation on that is to take that sanding block and to make a wedge shape, kind of a chisel shape on the pencil. So now I have my edge where I can make a nice, very thin line, and just by twisting the pencil, turning the pencil, I can now move from thin to thick and back again. A variation on that is to take that wedge shape and to blunt it. And this way I can get a continuously thicker line, as thick as the width of the graphite itself. What I'd like you to do is to take some, start with your cheap pencils, just some pencils you have kicking around your drawers of your house, and you want to practice sharpening them, bring them to different kinds of points, and then play with them on your paper. Once you've figured out a good way to sharpen them, what you want to do is to take 2 of your good pencils. I have a 6B here and a 6H, which I've sharpened into the wedge shape, and then you can take these and see how they'll behave differently. Here we are with the 6B, on the wedge, back to the point, on the wedge to the point, on the wedge to the point. And you want to see how that plays out. So that was the 6B. Here we are with the 6H, a much harder pencil, and I'm on the wedge, back to the point. And so you'll find with a box of pencils, you can get a great, great variety of line. As you whittle down your pencils, they get smaller and smaller, of course. And a good tool to have, and you might want to get a couple of these, are pencil extenders. And very simply, the small pencil will fit into the extender, and it just gives you more life out of your pencil. Another great tool are mechanical pencils. They come in 4 different thicknesses of lead. We call them lead. Again, it's still graphite. We have a 0.3 millimeter, 0.5 millimeter, 0.7 millimeter, and a 0.9 millimeter. And the leads that they make for these come from about 4B to 4H, so not as extensive as with the graphite pencils. The way these work is, we'll have the 0.3 millimeter here, is that generally you take off the eraser end and deposit the leads, which are about 2 inches long, into the pencil and then click them forward. Here I have a 0.3 millimeter, that's a very small lead, with a 2H, which is on the hard side, and we'll make a line with it. Nice and light, thin. Now let's try that 0.5 millimeter with an HB lead. So this is a little thicker and a little darker. Next, 0.7 millimeter, a little thicker yet with a B lead. And finally, a 0.9 millimeter with a 2B lead, thickest and darkest of the group. These will all be useful when we get into perspective and more technical drawing. A related tool is the lead holder. And these take leads from 6B to 6H, and they're longer, and they generally come in tubes or containers, something like this. This, unlike the mechanical pencils, these generally insert from the front end. And these we sharpen with something called a lead pointer. So using the lead pointer, we can bring the lead to a fine point, and let's make a line with it. I have a 2B lead here. And we can also use our sanding block to bring it to a wedge shape. And this way I can get a fine line with the edge of the wedge, and as I rotate, I can get that much thicker line, and I can move back and forth between the two. So try all your graphite tools. Make lines of various lightness, thickness, and darkness. Try sharpening in various ways, and test them all out. Along with graphite, charcoal is among the most common drawing materials. It comes in 4 basic forms: vine or willow, compressed, charcoal pencil, and charcoal powder. For our line drawings, we'll be using vine and willow. We'll talk about the others later as we begin to get into value. Vine or willow is the most forgiving, easiest to erase. It's called vine or willow because it's commonly made from pieces of grape or other vines or pieces of willow. One of the first Western books on art materials, Il Libro dell'Arte, the Book of Art, was written in late 14th century Italy by Cennino Cennini, and he gives us a recipe for making charcoal. Take a nice dry willow stick and make some slips of it the length of the palm of your hand. Divide these pieces like matchsticks. Then take a brand new casserole and put in enough to fill up the casserole. He goes on to tell us to wrap it up tightly and take it to the baker's at the end of the day, after he's all finished work. Then leave it in his oven until morning. The idea here is to let the wood char at the right temperature and for the right amount of time, and it has to cook in the absence of oxygen, hence the tight wrapping. Oxygen gets in and you get ash instead of charcoal. Today, artist charcoal is made in kilns. Since there's no binder, just cook wood, it turns to powder pretty easily. On the one hand, that makes it really forgiving. It's among the easiest materials to erase. But it's highly fugitive on the other, easy to rub away a morning's work with a careless swipe of the hand. In fact, Cennini tells us, take a feather, chicken or goose as may be, and sweep the charcoal off what you've drawn. That drawing will disappear. Vine and willow generally come in 4 grades: extra soft, soft, medium, and hard. They also come in a variety of shapes and sizes from thin to thick, from cylindrical to rectangular, and even chunks. For line, the cylindrical sticks work very well. So here we have 4 grades of that cylindrical vine and willow charcoal. We have an extra soft, we have a soft, we have a medium, and we have a hard. Now let's take a look and see what kinds of lines they give us. We'll start with the extra soft. If we want to get a thin line, we can use that edge, that rounded edge. And if we want to get a thicker line, we can just use some more pressure. And that's very common. It's very brittle stuff. And if you put pressure on it, especially when it's very long, it can break. So that's our extra soft. Here's our soft. We'll put some more pressure on that. Again, breaking. Here is our medium, and you can see I've sharpened this to a point, and we can use the edge of it to get something thicker, and we can move from one to the other, so we can really get a real variety. And the way this sharpens very easily, just put it in your pencil sharpener, and we get a point. And the hard, again, we can sharpen, get a nice point, and we can use the side edge to get thicker lines as well. Just as with our pencils, we'll wear our charcoal down, so this charcoal holder is another great tool. We can take even our very small little slips of charcoal and still get some real use out of them. Next up, erasers. Some artists avoid erasing. They want a pristine surface, and heavy erasing can modify the surface texture of your paper. Many other artists embrace erasure. Matisse, for example, made erasing very much a part of his drawing. So there's an aesthetic consideration here. For this course, erasing is a necessary part of many of the projects, so don't be timid with your erasers. I like to have every eraser I can find. Unlike collecting vintage automobiles, collecting erasers is a very affordable, if less romantic, pastime. Different erasers modify or erase what we draw in different ways. They all have strengths and weaknesses. The factors involved include erasing power, precision, ability to handle large areas, amount of smearing, and residual marks made by the eraser itself. I'd suggest getting 3 different erasers to start: a kneaded, a pink pearl, and a pencil-type eraser. Now, the kneaded is a great eraser. It can erase and won't give us any crumbs at all. In fact, here I have some erasure crumbs. We can use its adhesive quality to actually lift the crumbs off of our page. And as you can see, we can modify its shape. So sometimes when I want to get in and just get a small amount of something, I can make a little shape on my eraser so I just get exactly what I want. It's terrific. This is our vine charcoal here. Very good for the vine charcoal. Takes it right off. With other things, one of the great capabilities of this is that it really acts like a volume switch. If I don't want, let's say I don't want to take it all away, but I just want to make that gray a bit lighter, I can lightly tamp it and I can lighten my gray. Similarly with the graphite, if I take a look at some graphite over here and I think it's just too dark, if I just tamp with the kneaded eraser, I take the volume down. Now the other thing, as we knead it, it becomes self-cleaning. So that's one of the great qualities of this. It does something that a lot of other erasers do not. Our next eraser is the pink pearl. It has that distinctive wedge shape, and it's very useful because it has a sharp knife-like edge. So if I have some line where the line is too thick, I can use that in a fairly precise way to make my line thinner. Now, over time, that knife-like edge was going to wear down. So what we're going to want to do is have a good kitchen knife, a sharp knife available. And if we take these erasers that have worn down, and we can just cut into them and return to a nice knife-like edge. Next are these pencil-type erasers. Again, very useful for making more precise type of erasures. I want to thin out a line. I can really almost draw with the eraser, tapering my line as I need to. Another useful tool is the chamois cloth. While not an eraser, if we remember Cennino Cennini tells us that take that feather and you can wipe away the charcoal. If I take this and just wipe the charcoal, a lot of it will go away. So it can be used also as an erasing tool. There are many other vinyl and rubber erasers. You'll find them all at your art stores. There, in fact, are electric erasers, and there are erasers which will fit on the back of your pencils. All of these are very useful, and they'll interact with different materials. Each one will interact with different materials and papers in different ways. Now, one of the things that you see, or one of the things I'd like you to do is to take your erasers and try them with your different materials, with your different types of graphite, 10B to 10H, any other pencils you have around, and with your charcoal, and experiment with your erasers and see what they'll do. Now, you'll notice that as I've been erasing, I have all of these erasure crumbs, and we're going to want to get rid of that as we work. One of the easiest ways is simply to lift up your page, and we're going to take it over to the garbage can and just shake it off. And some of it will come off, but some of it will still adhere to our page. So what we're going to want to do here, as we noted, we could use that kneaded eraser to take up some of it. We could also just lightly blow, and sometimes that will get rid of some of the erasure. And then we have various types of brushes we can use to get rid of the erasure. Sometimes you'll want something rather pointed where I could really get in a delicate way. A 1-inch chip brush or 2-inch chip brush can also work pretty well, and we want to kind of flick up and away so we don't spread the material off our paper. And of course, as we get into some perspective drawing, we may want to use a larger brush, a drafting brush. Next, let's talk about ink. You want a deep black. A good one is Speedball Super Black. For line, a small brush about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch at the top of the ferrule, that's the metal piece that holds the hairs together, and about 3/8 to 5/8 inches long works very well. These types of brushes are either made from animal hair or from synthetic material. The most expensive are labeled sable, though they're generally made using mink or weasel hair. For our purpose, synthetic sables at a fraction of the cost will be just fine. When you buy your brush, it may feel a bit stiff. Many manufacturers dip the hair in light glue to help maintain the brush's shape. Before you use a new brush, run it under warm water, gently massage the hairs to remove the glue, dry the brush, and you're set. Your brush should come with a small plastic cap. Hold on to it. After you use your brush, rinse it, dry it, replace the cap. This keeps the brush from getting damaged. It's very difficult to control line or mark if the brush's shape becomes irregular. So the first thing you want to do is to take your ink and pour a little off into a cup. You run the risk of knocking the whole thing over and making a mess if you just use the ink right out of the bottle. This way we can contain any problems. First thing I'd like you to try and do is to make a thin line. It helps if you brace your hand against the page so you're not putting all the weight of your hand onto the brush. And then try and make a thicker line. And again, we just need to make sure the brush is adequately charged, and we'll apply a little more pressure. And you can see that the range of line thickness we can get with a little brush like this is pretty extraordinary. And we can also go from thin to thin again, just by changing that pressure. And we can expand the range by having a couple brushes. These are even fairly similar in size. I can still get a fairly thin line with one of this size, and I can get something really quite robust as well. Another thing you want to try is creating a discontinuous line. So we'll let the brush kind of skip along, and it will have even a greater quality of lightness when it's discontinuous. And another thing you can try is drying out the brush so that rather than getting a full black or even a dark gray, we can get a very, very light gray, a real whisper. I'm going to take out a little more ink here. And as we pull more and more ink out of the brush, well, there I've gone, I don't know if you can even see that, very, very, very faint, faint gray. Use the rest of the page that you have here to experiment, make some different kinds of lines, use your graphite, your charcoal, your erasers and ink, and see all the different kinds of lines that you can come up with. Next, let's look at our drafting and measuring tools. A gridded, clear 18-inch ruler like this 18-inch see-through graph ruler is very useful. Line up a grid line on the ruler with the vertical edge of your page, and you can draw a good horizontal. Line up a grid line with the horizontal edge of your page, and you can draw a vertical. For greater accuracy, we use a T-square. Make sure the edges of your page are parallel to the edges of your drawing board. Place the T against the vertical edge of the drawing board to draw a horizontal line. Place the T on the top of the drawing board to draw a vertical line. Put the T-square back in the horizontal position. Take out your clear triangle. One that's 14 to 16 inches will work best. Put the base of the triangle on the T-square. Now you can easily draw verticals. Move it out of the way to draw horizontals with your T-square. This will be a time saver when we get into linear perspective. I'll be using what's called a parallel straight edge drawing board instead of the T-square. It's an option to investigate if you get into a lot of technical drawing. As you begin to generate a lot of lines, the graphite can rub off on these tools. If this happens, your tools will begin to spread a gray mist over your drawing, so keep an eye out for this. If your tools begin to get dirty, wash them with a small amount of light soap and warm water, dry them well, and you'll be ready to continue drawing. The last tools in this category you'll make yourself. They include a transparent grid and a viewfinder. The transparent grid's a sheet of clear film with a 1-inch square grid on it. The viewfinders are L-shaped pieces of cardboard you'll use to help you frame and compose your drawings. Let's start with that grid. The simplest way to make one is to go online. You'll find a number of sites that let you generate custom graph paper and download it. Just search custom graph paper. You'll be able to enter the dimensions and print this or photocopy it onto clear transparency film. You could also draw one with your ruler in T-square or in a program like Photoshop, then similarly copy or print onto transparency film. For the viewfinder, you'll need a piece of mat board or heavy cardboard that's at least 12 by 14 inches. First, lightly rule a 2-inch border around the rectangle with a well-sharpened 2H pencil. If you have a ruler like this, which is exactly 2 inches wide, you can line it up with the mat board's edge and trace. Next, using your utility knife and straight edge, cut out the center rectangle and put it aside. Make sure you do this on some kind of safe surface. A clean kitchen cutting board will work fine. Turn the frame horizontally. From the upper left corner, measure 12 inches toward the right and make a vertical line. From the bottom right corner, measure 12 inches to the left and make a similar vertical line. Cut along both these lines with your utility knife, and you should have right angles which are 12 inches in either direction. Now, with your 2H pencil and ruler, calibrate both right angles along their inner edges, measuring out from the 90-degree angle along each arm. Make a thin, light line at each 1-inch interval, then number your inches. You'll also need 2 clips to hold your viewfinder together. There are a couple miscellaneous items that will be useful, including masking tape, a compass, some push pins, and a box or carrying case for your materials. Our final topic is setting up your work area. If you're making small drawings, say not more than 12 to 15 inches in any direction, you can easily draw on a table or with your drawing board supported on your knees against the table's edge. Then arrange your materials and supplies on the table so they're conveniently at hand. Larger drawings need to be supported more or less vertically. An easel is a logical choice. Here's the reason. If we lay the paper flat on a table, the page is in a foreshortened position. It will look like a trapezoid instead of a rectangle. As you can imagine, this makes controlling shapes and proportions on the page more difficult. Ideally, you want to set up so that the center of the page is at about the height of your clavicle, your collarbone. That's a default position. Of course, you can raise it or lower it as needed, even rotate your drawing to make working on a given section more comfortable or natural. You also want the easel to be at about 90 degrees to your line of sight, and you want to be 18 to 24 inches from the page. This will, of course, depend on your arm length, but one of the goals is to draw at a distance from the page that allows you to see as much of the page as possible without moving your eyes or head. When drawing at an easel, many people set up their materials on a table to their side at a 90-degree angle to the easel, on the right for righties, on the left for lefties. Having backup room behind you is a real help. 5 to 8 feet is ideal. That's so that you can walk back periodically and look at your drawing from a greater distance. It's much easier to see how the various parts of the drawing are relating with a bit of distance. When we're working on still life problems, drawing from observation, you want a second table positioned against the wall for your objects. An average height table about 30 inches with a plain top is best. Something without any distracting wood grain or pattern. A plain wall's best too. For many of our projects, white will be ideal for both. If your table and wall aren't white, you can cover them with a large sheet of white paper or foam core. When drawing from observation, it's good practice to put the easel or drawing board parallel to and just to the left or right of what you're drawing. Ideally, you want to be able to view your drawing and the subject at the same time without swiveling your head. When you back up, you want to be able to see both at once in the same planar orientation. As we'll see, when drawing from observation, it's very useful to be able to draw from different heights. These different views can be dramatic and can make our compositions and drawings much more interesting. Having a chair that can be lowered or raised, that's a real benefit. Having an easel with a similar range is equally useful. Even having a small low stool and a sturdy box or stepladder to stand on can all be great additions. You'll also want sufficient light in the room so that you can see light lines and marks on your page. But you want to make sure that the light isn't throwing glare or cast shadow on your page. Both can be distracting. You're going to also need some still life objects. You'll be able to use many things you likely have in your home. We'll talk about specifics in the lessons ahead. We'll also be doing some self-portraits, so a full-length movable mirror will be extremely useful. These materials will get us started. We'll talk about additional materials in future lectures as we need them.